I love Germany so much that I'm glad that there are two of them. This is a quote by the French poet François Mauriac. And that was also, you could say, the views of Margaret Thatcher and François Mitterrand when the wall came tumbling back down in about 35 years ago. But at that time, then the US intervened, and we had the pressure on these two countries. We got German unification, we got Maastricht, we got the Euro, the rest is history. This is just one example where the United States of America has played a crucial role in European integration. We could also mention the Marshall Plan, if you'd like to. And now we fast forward to today. We have a different situation, a different United States of America, increasingly turning inwards, also outwards regards to China. So what we'll debate now is obviously what will be the impact of all this on European integration. The core questions will be, what happens if we have a second Biden presidency? How will that be different from a possible second Trump election? And to do this, we have two brilliant speakers. If you'd like to join me up here, we have Arancha, and you are Dean of the Sciences Po School of International Relations in Affairs in Paris, former Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs. You've just co-authored an important piece in Foreign Affairs, Trump Proving Europe. How can the continent prepare for American abandonment? That's a pretty strong title, one will have to say. Majda, you are Senior Fellow at the European Council Foreign Relations, former Fellow at Johns Hopkins, and you have just written extensively on the internal politics of the Republican Party. So let's just give him a big hand of applause. And I'll just warn you, we'll not get into the sweepstakes or the probabilities of who will win the American election, what's going to happen in the swing states. That's not what we'll debate. We'll debate what does this actually mean for European integration. And let's start with you, Arancha, the piece that you've written about this Trump proving Europe. How on earth can you actually do that? What's the idea behind that term?
Well, thank you very much, Lieke. And let me tell you that was just to get people to read the paper, right?
Well, you succeeded, yeah.
Because the paper, essentially, the thesis of this paper is that Trump is not the problem and Biden is not the solution. That Euro's problem is the lack of integration in Europe. And that the answer to Europe's problem lies in European hands. That's the thesis of this paper. Well, we needed people to read it. And if you had drafted something like the Letta paper or the Draghi paper, nobody would have read this. So we call this Trump Proving Europe basically to dissect in which way US abandonment of the world, a more inward-looking US, which is what this paper argues about, in which way this affects Europe. And more importantly, what should Europe do? So I'm going to try to break down what Europe needs to do, building a bit on also on what we have heard this morning, which has been really good. The first thing we argue in this paper is that where Europe is not integrated, Europe is not competitive.
Sounds like Letta, though.
This sounds like Letta, but we wrote the paper before Letta. So
okay, sorry, yeah.
Give us a bit of credit.
Yeah, okay,
so
yeah.
This paper basically argues that if you look at the three big drivers of the world's competitiveness, technology, energy, and capital, the EU is not integrated, and therefore the EU cannot compete. It's not that the EU has no money. The EU has money. Europeans save a lot, but these savings go to US capital markets. It's not that Europe relied too much on foreign energy. Of course, the EU did. Is that its market was not sufficiently integrated to withstand the blow of one of these sources of energy from one of these markets, all of a sudden cutting into the European market. It's not that the EU doesn't have the ability to do technology. If you look at where most patents in the world are generated, it's in Europe. But Europe does not manage to make its knowledge get into its market. Why is that? Because we are fragmented. Fragmentation is our poison. So the first part of the paper is about, well, if Europe wants to really stand to the possibility of Donald Trump, don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm arguing for Donald Trump to be elected. We would rather...
Can't vote anyway, I presume.
And vote. We'd rather have the US citizens elect President Biden for a second term because he is a kinder version of a more inward-looking US, but the fact of the matter remains, it's an inward-looking US. Second area which matters a lot to the European Union, it's international trade. 2/3 of Europe's growth depends on Europe breathing with the rest of the world. And the US, whether Biden or Trump, no different. One is protectionist, the other one will be super protectionist if he is elected. So what do we do? Do we follow that recipe? I don't think it fits with who the EU is. The EU has to do two things. One, on security, it's acupuncture, not bazooka. The US is going bazooka. We can only do acupuncture. And use acupuncture intelligently. Asians know how to play with acupuncture where it hurts.
And where does it hurt then?
And where it doesn't hurt...
Yeah, where does it really, really hurt?
Well, let's look at the saga on electric vehicles to see whether or not we can use intelligently acupuncture. But where the EU has an interest, which is in open markets, double down and do this in Asia. Do this in the area where the US has retreated and do it in the area which poses a challenge to China. This is called CPTPP. So let's do a big alliance with a group of countries that see it like we see it and need it like we need it. Third, it's about security and defense, totally fragmented in Europe too. An area which is very dangerous because unlike Trump 1, here we've got a huge difference. It's called war in Ukraine. Our future depends on war in the Ukraine. If President Trump cuts a dirty deal with Putin on Ukraine, it's the EU who loses. We have tied ourselves to Ukraine. So now we have to walk this to the very end. What does this mean? It means pulling up our socks on defense and security, starting with integrating our defense markets. We need the next commission to have a commissioner for the defense internal market. We don't need Karl von Clausewitz. We need markets that have the same standards, procurement that work in tandem, and an organization of demand so that we can organize the offer. That's a big challenge. On security and defense, we have more European countries part of NATO. NATO is our security alliance. We have to pull up our socks in NATO too. Europeanize NATO, not pull out of NATO. Make it look, feel, and invest it more by Europeans. Mind you, the last two additions to NATO, Sweden and Finland, I think on Russia, they have their own taste because they've got a border with this country. Fourth, and this is the trickiest, it's democracy. This is where the rubber hits the road. Because obviously there is a big difference between President Trump and President Biden. President Trump emboldens illiberal democracies in Europe. We've spoken a lot about Meloni. I worry less about Meloni. Maybe I'm in a disagreement with Natalie on this one. Why do I worry less? Because if she wants to last in Italian politics, and we know that Italian politics are extremely ephemeral, Conte didn't last, Salvini didn't last. There is a long list of people who didn't last. If she wants to last, and she wants to last, she needs Europe for its economy. So she'll be very careful. And Europe will have leverage vis-à-vis her. I worry about two. One has been mentioned, is called Marine Le Pen. The other one hasn't been mentioned, is called the Netherlands. It's a founding member of the European Union.
I thought referred to Hungary, but no, you didn't.
Yeah, but I don't worry that much about Hungary, frankly speaking. At the end of the day, with Hungary, excuse me for being a bit blunt, it's all been about how much. No decision has been finally blocked by Viktor Orban in Europe. It's only been a matter of time and the number of figures on the check. I worry about Le Pen and I worry about the Netherlands. So to cut a long story short, and maybe we'll leave it here so that we can have a bit of an interaction, to me is, what do we Europeans want Europe to be? Do we want Europe to have 30 years after this world that Natalie was describing to us, a world in which the rest of the world looked like us? Do we want to rejoin the world, or do we want to be shaped by the rest of the world? This is what's on the ballot on the 9th of June. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the answer from the European citizens will be clear on this point.
So we'll pull up our socks. Now we move to you, Majda, because you have in your recent, one of your recent pieces, compared Trump's foreign policy to a ghost. Scary in concept, fuzzy in detail. So let's just hear your more detailed description of these ghosts.
Thank you so much. Before I turn to the ghosts, and there are many, can I just say thank you for having us here. And I know you said you don't want to talk about the elections and elections outcome, but the setup does make me feel like Arancha and I are in a presidential debate, standing behind these tables and with the audience. So it's really
There are no commercials here, so...
Absolutely. Great time to be in Copenhagen for the first time for me as well. We have compared kind of a ghost of kind of orange spectrum haunting Europe, and obviously a reference to Europe really still licking its wounds from Trump's first term. It's not that long ago. And Europeans have not forgotten all of the kind of area of issues that they've been dealing with Trump's first presidency. And so what we've been doing at ECFR is really trying to make sense of what has happened to the Republican Party since, Trump's departure from at least the White House, not entirely the political scene, and how do we make sense of the cacophony of voices within the Republican Party. In February last year, you have Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell assuring the Europeans that Republicans are with them on Ukraine. And Europeans like to hear these messages, and they usually come back and say, no, Republican Party, Senate is with us, no problem. And then, on the other hand, you have Ukraine supplemental that was blocked in the House for so long, and you see the consequences thereof already on the battlefield. You have Trump's ally, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, basically calling on large-scale strikes on Iran's Revolutionary Guard headquarters and nuclear facilities. And another Trump ally, J.D. Vance, kind of confronting him to say, what nonsense, this is the biggest idiot ever. And so how do we understand what's happening in the Republican Party and who can control Trump's mind if he is reelected is what we were kind of struggling with. And so 2 points there. Arancha wisely said this is not just about Trump, it's about structural trends in the US policy. We'll come back to that. But even within the Republican Party, we cannot hope to wait out Trump and to return to the Republican Party of our grandfathers. It's not coming back. And most of the data points actually show to that. So if you look at Ukraine supplemental, nearly every Republican senator under the age of 55 voted no on Ukraine supplemental. 15 out of the 17 senators who were elected since 2018 voted no on the supplemental. So the party is changing. And that change will not be reversed after Trump's departure. In fact, if you look at the recent Pew Research polling data, 2/3 of Republicans actually want Trump to retain a political role after the next mandate, or want someone in his mold, a candidate in his mold to run the party. So where is the party headed? And this is where we've looked into really kind of detailed debates between what we called three Republican tribes. We've called them restrainers, China prioritizers, and primacists. And we looked at where do they stand on kind of the key issues that animate the European-American relationship: climate and energy, China, trade, Russia, Ukraine, security, NATO, human rights, etc. And so where they differ is that they see the role of the US very differently in terms of US leadership, in terms of US commitment to European security. And so the two tribes that actually dominate the party and are setting direction of travel are not your traditional internationalist Mitch McConnell's, Mike Pompeo's, Nikki Haley's that we have called primacists, who think we can do many things at the same time and there's interlinkage between the theaters. But it's the kind of J.D. Vances of this party who think that, you know, or Rick Grenell's or Steve Bannon's who think that America either needs to prioritize its own border, you've all heard it. Even Lindsey Graham, who's actually a primacist, didn't show up at the Munich Security Conference because he went to the southern border. And then the kind of China prioritizers, you've all probably heard of Elbridge Colby and Senator Josh Hawley. The whole Heritage Foundation with its new president, Kevin Roberts, is in this China prioritizer mold. They believe that, you know, what Europe was of the generation of our fathers and grandfathers is Asia is to our generation and should be, and that we absolutely need to refocus time and energy to Indo-Pacific, and this should have happened yesterday. And so, you know, the question really in the end is, and this is where I will add some sort of bigger shocks. If Ukraine shock, if that's not going to be enough, there's certainly more shocks coming. We've been working out different scenarios at ECFR, and we're going to publish that soon on, you know, how are these tribes going to try to capture Trump's foreign policy agenda? What will be the interplay? And what, in effect, can we expect from a next Trump administration on China, whether it's economic or security, on Russia and Ukraine? What is that deal going to look like? How is the Trump administration going to approach Zelensky and the Europeans? We've looked at Middle East and North Africa. We've looked at trade. And we've looked at the NATO dimension, because there are kind of detailed plans being developed on minimizing the US role in NATO, short of pulling it out, the famously called dormant NATO. And finally, the one that scares me most, in fact, and goes back to all of previous discussions, is the emergence of this illiberal international. Trump, you know, may not care much about the illiberal leaders in Europe, but they do all care about him returning to the White House. They're sitting and waiting, and so we have a scenario in which, when Trump is elected, the next CPAC meeting in Washington is going to see flocking of these leaders to Washington to kind of try and get Trump support on their agenda, how to undermine the EU policies that they very much dislike. So I'll leave it here.
Excellent. Just make sure there's something with your microphone. Just check it. One second. Okay. So the overall point here is obviously there are many similarities because of these sort of structural changes that with regards to the United States of America. So one should not say this is Joe Biden and this is Trump. There's completely different foreign policy, completely different presidency. That's obviously one of your major points. But going back to the telephone call, 24-hour sort of peace talk. Trump wins the election. He phones Putin, phones Zelensky, 24 hours. Are we in that conversation? And if we are not, what will Europe then do?
No, clearly, the way thus is seen both from Washington and probably from Moscow is that when the moment comes, Ukraine would want to have a NATO friend seated next to him. And that friend is very likely to be the US. And Russia is likely to want to have a friend seated next to him. And that's most likely going to be China. So the question is, where is Europe in all of this? So for Europe to be there, Europe has to have its own plan. Europe has to have its own strategy, something that it needs to work out with President Zelensky. Obviously, you don't trumpet that, because the moment you trumpet, you don't have it anymore, but you have to prepare for that moment. If you want to be at the table rather than being on the menu, which is what will happen. If we do not prepare, we will be on the menu, because our destiny, we've decided to tie it to Ukraine in different ways. First, in terms of the support we've been providing to Ukraine, very consistently, even when the US was hesitant, as it was in the last 5-6 months. Europe was there financially, but also because we are going to put Ukraine on path to EU accession in the June Council. So it is for us to put on the table what the moment comes, what we think should be a solution, or at least a temporary solution. I don't think, just for the reasons that we just heard, I don't think there is a long-term prospect of a deal, but there is some kind of placeholder that needs to be built, and for that Europe needs to be prepared.
And do you see that coming?
Europe being prepared or Europe sitting at the table? It's
Make
two
your own
different
choice.
things. So could I just comment on this?
Sure.
Because I think earlier you mentioned that there's plenty of US officials who think Europeans are not going to even be consulted or present. We actually believe they will. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, obviously, in order to make some sort of a deal with Putin, Trump will have to offer sanctions relief. Europeans should probably participate in that. They will have, if we think back of kind of the method of peacemaking that happened in Trump's first administration, one thing I'm thinking of is Rick Grenell trying to kind of broker the Kosovo-Serbia deal and engage in a land swap. I mean, in essence, none of them really care about the details of the deal. They care about being able to claim quick victory. And they're kind of deal-seeking missiles, and Grenell is definitely going to play the role. So we can kind of trace back and think how they would go about this. And I think they would definitely want to engage Europeans. I mean, they're already engaging Europeans. Viktor Orban has discussed with Trump in Mar-a-Lago the kind of modalities of European position, of, or at least his kind of position within EU. And I think what we will have is Europe divided into two camps, at least. One camp, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, which will insist that we cannot negotiate the fate of Ukraine, because it will be splitting off the territories that are illegally occupied and annexed by Russia. I mean, we know some of the modalities of the deal. You cannot get it unless you give to Putin the parts of the territory that he already holds. And, then there's so many things to juggle. How are the Ukrainians going to respond? They will want European support if pressed by, and so, Europeans will be engaged in one way or another. I think the question is, how will they respond? And I think that, the kind of camp that is the biggest, and perhaps luckily for us also in terms of the GDP and the spending, the strongest within the EU, will want to kind of define some core interests that are related to Russia and Ukraine, which are European, which are keeping the territorial integrity, preventing Russia's further revanchism and incursions into Baltics, etc., and kind of setting up conditions for the democratic consolidation of Ukraine that is also related to EU accession. And so I think the other camp, in which we'll definitely have Hungary, but as you say, Meloni, the moment Trump comes, Italy will probably flip to the other side, already insists that we're losing with the US, that Ukraine is losing even with the US support, and that we cannot sustain the war effort without them. We have no kind of capabilities to backfill for withdrawal of the US support. And I think the key question really is how, the coalition of the willing, how will they manage to kind of organize outside of seeking consensus in the EU institutions, and whether we're going to be able to step up on kind of backfilling and delivering further military support, training, providing for air defense of the big cities in the West. I mean, there's all of these challenges. When you mentioned 1999 conclusions, I was thinking back of Helsinki Council conclusions, where we had, after the Balkan Wars, an ambition to have 80,000 combat or 60,000 combat-ready troops for deployment. Now that figure is 5,000 in the strategic compass. So, you know, I think in any event, the question really is, whatever we decide, however this plays out, how much are we able to backfill for the withdrawal of US support? How quickly are we able to kind of equip Ukraine, which will be needed even if the ceasefire is reached under Trump? Because the whole point of it kind of then being stable is that one arms Ukraine as quickly as possible, as to prevent Russia being able to kind of rearm and continue its offensive and use that just as a momentum to emerge stronger.
Yes. Can I on this point? There is two fundamental differences, in my view, between Trump 1 and possible Trump 2. Let's not, do as if he had been elected already. But there's two fundamental differences. Those that in the EU were very happy to transact with Donald Trump 1 are those that find it hardest to transact with Donald Trump 2 on Ukraine. The second fundamental difference is called the UK. The government in the UK that will result from the election is not the government of the UK that was ready to transact with Donald Trump 1. And it's also the UK, the country that has tied, in a way, its position to that of Ukraine. So I see there a bit of elements to build something that would be a European position that would help ballast the very quick and dirty instincts that are likely to come on the other side of the Atlantic. And maybe the way is, you are the father of the victory, but the terms are determined with a bit more of a European contribution, which is, in my view, where we could land if we wanted to land.
And the camps that Majda mentioned, do you also see that?
In terms of Ukraine debate? I mean, prioritizers and restrainers, they are, the restrainer camp you can kind of almost identify with Tucker Carlson's narrative, which is not just kind of constrained to him. It's really present in the base of the party and the movement. And then you have the China prioritizers, and both of these camps think that Ukraine and European security is not US's key priority. China and Taiwan are. Even if you take, escalation with Philippines in the South China Sea over Sierra Madre, that is another potential crisis that would come in even before any kind of Taiwan crisis. So, if you would have a crisis erupting in the Indo-Pacific where the US needs to get engaged, which they are very, very strongly counting with, if you have another aspect, which is close to my heart and work, is Western Balkans. The leaders in the Western Balkans have openly announced that they're waiting for Trump to be reelected in order to start revising the borders again. And so if you have multiple crises breaking out at the same time, along with this coalition of illiberal leaders, and Asia especially kind of dragging US to refocus, not just Trump, even Biden, then really the question is, why do we expect the US to remain the backbone of our security? We can't. And the key question is, how quickly can we step up on doing something on our own? And being a child of Bosnia War, I'm a bit traumatized by that. So.
But you mentioned that we should draw up a plan with regards to being able then to have our own voice if we have this infamous then call between Trump, Putin and Zelensky. Who should draw up that plan? Now that we've just heard about France and Germany not having the best relationship, at least they didn't eat when there were pictures taken this time, not like when Macron went to Hamburg and Macron had to eat Fischbrötchen. Even I don't eat Fischbrötchen, although I'm half German, which is basically, fish and bread. So who's going to draw up this plan?
I think this is where this Weimar Triangle comes so handy.
Yeah.
This is where thus...
there's no fish there, at least, yeah.
Well, there's plenty of fish, but this is where this triangle is interesting. This is where what will happen in the German election moving forward matters a lot. This is where how much of this can be, in a way, locked in before.
I mean this German election or the next one? I mean the European Parliament one or...
No, the European Parliament is not a German election. It's a European election.
But you already see
there is going to be a German election. And I think it's fair to say that also may take a bit of a difference compared to the current one. This is why dealing with this, as we will have to deal before there may be a change in the French presidency, will matter a lot. But I see the Weimar Triangle a good place to have this conversation. Remember who was the first country to jump to Trump 1 in Europe? It was Poland. So this is where what is happening in Poland and what will happen, what is happening within the Weimar Triangle is so important because Russia changes the equation in a big way.
Do you agree on that?
Yes, I agree. I definitely.
So then we should maybe just
as well.
So should we then move to China and a possible trade war and everything? If you look upon it from the Republican Party's perspective,
China is such an interesting bit because Trump is an outlier in his party on China. That is such a kind of outlier generally. You have a bipartisan consensus on China where the Democrats and Republicans are pretty much aligned. They both agree that, all of the national security strategies documents China is the main rival and the competitor, the greatest threat. Chinese hegemony in the Pacific needs to be kind of deterred, and the strategic industrial policy of Biden has kind of followed up in the footsteps of Trump. And if you look at Trump himself, he is obsessed with the trade deficit with China, the US trade deficit. He's less concerned about either kind of, Taiwan contingencies. He has never really come out to say that, unlike Biden, to say that US would come forward in the defense of Taiwan. He's been criticizing Taiwan for stealing America's kind of semiconductor industry and competitiveness. He has received tens of millions in donations from Chinese state-owned companies to his legal entities, whether it's the hotels or golf courses, etc. And he's been, interestingly, one of the rare, along with Marjorie Taylor Greene and with Kellyanne Conway, one of the rare voices opposing the TikTok legislation on China. And so you can see him somewhere, completely different from where the two parties are. And this has been one of the questions we've been struggling with to kind of predict where would he go on China. He would actually be disinclined to follow the consensus and congressional pressure. He'd be inclined to try and make trade deal to sell Chinese more goods. He'd keep the rhetoric, but he'd probably be inclined of making some sort of a deal on Taiwan. The question is, will he be able to, or will he remain boxed in the kind of emerging consensus under the pressure of Congress, but also the fact that all of these loyalists that are sort of, gathering in coalitions to write the policy playbooks for his next administration are all China hawks and prioritizers. And that's going to be really interesting to observe. In the last term, you had Trump, complete gap between Trump and his senior officials on Europe, on NATO, etc. So you had the restrainers kind of restraining him from his worst, the other sort of restrainers, from his worst instincts, right? The adults in the room, we called them. This time, the adults in your room, if you want, will be those who actually want to pull out troops from Europe, who want to minimize US role in NATO. But they will be hawks on China. And so if Trump is inclined to make some sort of a deal, it's going to be interesting how is that going to be followed through in the administration and in Congress. We know that, when he made deals with Erdogan over the phone in his first term, that kind of got stopped and blocked by Congress and the administration. So this is really one big unknown. And our prediction in the end, what we wrote is that he will remain boxed in and is going to be unable to offer anything that resembles a kind of a deal on China. And thus we will have, the continuation of all of the measures plus the ratcheting up of tariffs, which he has announced to be up to 60%. The question is, how is that going to affect Europe, and how will the Europe position itself?
No, I think
Pull up the socks, yeah.
if I look at Trump 1, the obsession with the trade deficit will continue in Trump 2. The trade deficit in the US is not a signal of the US economic weakness, quite the contrary. It's the reflection of the fact that the US, with the US dollar, with the US capital markets, with the US capacity to invest, attracts a lot of trade deficit. It's the contrary to what he believes. He believes trade deficit is weak, equals weak. Actually, trade deficit in the US is strong. It's a strength. And he will, again, this is what they are saying they will do. And, we know that normally he does what he says he's going to do. He will, again, ratchet up tariffs. We're going to have to eat it because it will hit us. Because he's going to do this for everyone in the hope that this will reduce the trade deficit, which will only go up. So, this is an avenue that has no solution other than maybe trying to do what we did last time, which is kind of a murky deals to convince him that he's winning something big, the bigger the better, in exchange for these tariffs not applying. But knowing that all of this is theatrical economics. None of this makes any sense. If we look at the US economy today, 70% of the inputs in the US economy come from China. And this is not solvable in the short term, nor is it solvable in the medium term. It's a reality of the interdependence in the world economy. So if you add huge tariffs on these intermediaries, it's going to make your business worse and worse. This is what happened last time. This is what will happen this time. But we'll just have to find another dog with another bone to play. I don't see any other solution. Because what we know also is that the trade representative that apparently Trump has in mind is the same one he had last time, Mr. Lighthizer. And if you read his latest book, it's doubled down on what he did in Trump 1. So,
Peace in the Economist, if you don't want to spend your summer holiday reading the book. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you had a final remark?
I was just going to say that's an interesting kind of little point of difference between Biden and Trump when it comes to tariffs, because I do think that Biden administration is just much more targeted on protecting strategic sectors rather than kind of going over the board. And there was a brilliant interview at Gideon Rahman's podcast with the former US trade representative under Obama, who was basically saying, hey, it's the reality. We have huge amount of trade with China. We cannot sanction it all. We have to kind of just focus on protecting the key sectors that are in our strategic interest and continue where we can. And I think this is probably going to be different if we get Trump to come back. At the same time, he is going to impose tariffs on Europe as well. I mean, he has the 10% universal baseline tariff. He is going to try to, push us on, obviously, so many issues at the same time. And I think an important question is, how is then Europe going to position itself in this between rock and the hard place, which is US-China rivalry? We're already having a really difficult time. And I think you had some great thoughts on what we need to do in terms of tactics.
That's for the next time.
Yeah, if this was a political debate, you both won. So let's give them a big hand.
Could I just say,
yes,
on who is going to lead in Europe and draft plans and responses? I nominate Arancha.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. Yeah,
She's not in the ballot.
Yeah. Thank you very much.